Prime Minister Trudeau talking about you last night?
Well, he's two-faced.
Do you think that Germany is too naive?
And honestly, with Trudeau, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. But, you know, the truth is that I called him out on the fact that he's not paying 2%. And I guess he's not very happy about it. I mean, you were there, a couple of you were there, and he's not paying 2%, and he should be paying 2%. It's Canada, they have money, and they should be paying 2%. So I called him out on that, and I'm sure he wasn't happy about it, but that's the way it is. Look, I'm representing the U.S., and he should be paying more than he's paying, and he understands it. So I can imagine he's not that happy, but that's the way it is.
Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. Thank you so much for watching today. It's going to be a little bit of a military analysis. One of my specialties, as you know, I'm ex-military. I served in the Royal Canadian Air Force for a total of about 13 years. And I still have a massive interest in national defense. Should Canada be spending 2% of its GDP, as NATO suggests, for national defense? The bigger question, though, is should Canada be spending that money for Canada and not for NATO? We'll be discussing that when I come back.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Yes, please subscribe if you haven't, resubscribe if you need to. Like us and show us your support by giving us the thumbs up and pound that like button. Because when you do that, you beat the suppression that YouTube is constantly imposing on this station. And we beat Trudeau's censorship. And that's what this is all about. Beating Trudeau's censorship. We got lots to talk about today. It's so nice to be back to discuss national defense issues with you. I know it's always of interest. But so what's going on? Justin Trudeau is off to another NATO summit. This time it's in Washington, D.C. Every year he goes, and every year he hears about how Canada is not spending. Canada has pledged billions in its latest defense plan, its policy document, North, Strong and Free. And we'll be talking a bit more about that later. But it's still nowhere near 2% of our GDP. We're about 1.3. And as this report indicates, if we follow through on this $1 billion defense plan within the next 5 years, we'll only be at 1.76% of the GDP. But yet, so what's awaiting Trudeau? NATO's losing patience with Trudeau. And of course, every year Trudeau goes through this. Now, I got two things to say before we go any further about this, because I think here's this defense policy paper. Our North, Strong and Free. A renewed vision for Canada's defense. It's the same old. And it actually talks about making these commitments 20 years in advance. This government's not going to be around in 20 years. A lot of its members, cabinet members, could be dead. It's certainly going to be a whole different government, a whole different world. So why are we talking about defense planning and spending that's 20 years in the future? This is ridiculous. But the bigger question is, why is NATO continuing to survive as an organization? Is NATO even relevant? And you know what? I would suggest it's not relevant anymore. It's not relevant because all it does is foment wars. Now, as I've told you several times, I used to write the talking points for NATO when I served as an Air Force officer in Bosnia. I tried to explain to the world that NATO was now doing a new mission. It was called peacemaking. There was no peace dividend after the end of the Cold War. We were now peacemaking. And NATO was going to insert itself into a civil war in the former Yugoslavia. And that was the beginning of endless wars around the world. We've seen the NATO get involved just about everywhere. And NATO meaning the United States. The United States has become involved in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, throughout the Middle East, and is increasingly getting involved in the war in Ukraine. And that's high stakes poker, my friend, because that could mean nuclear war with Russia. Let's have a look at where Canada actually stands in defense spending against other NATO members. Now, you might look at this and you remember the oft repeated phrase from Jonathan Higgins, the character in the first and best Magnum PI series, who used to say, "My God." There's Canada, the red bar at the very bottom of the page. Here we are spending 1.29% of our GDP on national defense, just ahead of Spain, Belgium, and Luxembourg. That is absolutely shocking. So that's how little Canada is spending on its national defense. It's always talking about how much it's going to spend in the future. But you know what? And I've shown you this slide before. This is former Lieutenant General Andrew Leslie, who was briefly in the Trudeau cabinet as the government whip. He was supposed to be, he thought, the defense minister, but Trudeau gave that in the interest of identity politics to Harjit Sajjan, one of the worst examples of political decrepitude I have ever seen in the House of Commons. So he gave it to Sajjan in the interest of identity politics. And this man made an absolute disaster of his office. But we'll talk more about that at another time. But General Leslie has pointed out how Canada's given away all of its ammo to Ukraine, and it has nothing left, and it can't replace it. Now, this is a man who would actually know what he's talking about. But no, he can't replace it. And we've given away, I think now, virtually, if not all, just about all of our Leopard tanks to Ukraine, and they have been destroyed on the battlefield, totally wiped out. And we're not getting those back either. And we can't replenish those either. That's the sorry state of Canada's national defense. What is NATO doing? And you saw that chart. 32, look at that. 32 nations now belong to NATO. Doesn't that increase the likelihood of a world war? Because if one of those nations is invaded by somebody else, namely Russia, Article 5 of NATO's constitution says that an attack on one member nation is an attack on all. So do you want to go to war for Slovakia? And that's exactly where we are with NATO. NATO used to be one of the greatest organizations on the face of the earth. It was a fantastic alliance system that had clear objectives and that kept the old Soviet Union out of Western Europe. It preserved the peace and it preserved freedom in Western Europe. That world changed with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The Soviet Union disbanded the Warsaw Pact, or I should say Russia, the new Russian Federation, disbanded the Warsaw Pact with the demise of the Soviet Union. NATO should have been disbanded as well. Instead, it continued to creep eastward, ever eastward towards Russia, and increased its membership from 18 to 32 member nations. This is insane. Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. And yes, Canada should be spending more on its military, but not because it wants to be a member of NATO, but because it wants to have a viable military that can defend North America. We're going to stay close allies with the United States. We're going to maintain continental defense. We're going to remain a member of NORAD, which is a viable, feasible organization. It's a viable defense alliance because it does not threaten anybody. It preserves sovereignty in North America for both Canada and the United States. No, Canada cannot maintain all of its defense commitments alone, but it can on a continental basis. It doesn't need to involve itself in European wars or European politics anymore, any more than the United States does. This is a fact of life. So, yes, we should be spending 2% of our GDP on national defense, but no, we should not be using it to spend money for NATO. Because NATO is an organization that's past its prime, past its shelf life. Yes, it was a viable, vibrant organization at one time, but so was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. But its days are long gone as well. Over a century ago, it perished. It passed into history, and NATO needs to pass into history now. What is NATO doing wrong? Well, all we need to do is look at how NATO, let's have a look at this slide first. The New York Times finally reported on this story, about 2 years too late. In 2022, Russia and Ukraine were talking. There was a peace treaty ready to be signed. And guess what? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky realized Ukraine wasn't going to win that war, and it better take what it could early in the conflict, end the war before Ukraine became a vassal of Russia, lost a lot of territory, and lost 1 million men and some women in the war. Well, that's exactly what's happened. And NATO was completely irresponsible in blocking the peace treaty. Boris Johnson went to intervene. Johnson, who was then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, he went to Ukraine to intervene and stop it. And they've admitted this now. They finally admitted that America did not want peace in Ukraine because it wanted to push the Russia farther into war and to see how much damage the war could produce on Russian military strength and economic strength. It wanted to destroy Russia. The United States has never been about accommodation with Russia following the end of the Soviet Union, following the end of the Cold War. It's always been about wearing down Russia so the United States can be the only superpower in the world, and the United States power can be paramount everywhere in the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, and of course in North America and South America. That's what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. So what does Canada want to be, continue to be a part of this organization that is falling apart? Turkey is on the verge of leaving NATO. Hungary wants out because it doesn't want a war with Russia and certainly doesn't think a nuclear war is a good idea for anybody. How much is Canada spending? And here we go. Canada can't spend 2% of its GDP on national defense. It can't maintain a viable Army, Navy, and Air Force. On average, 55% of our ships, of our armored personnel carriers, and our fighter jets at any one time are unserviceable. US, as we used to say in the military. They don't work. 55% on average. Fighter jets, transport aircraft, search and rescue aircraft, frigates, destroyers, Canadian patrol frigates, armored patrol carriers, armored personnel carriers, tanks, which we have none left, by the way. Virtually 100% of those are unserviceable. But look how much money we are spending in Ukraine. Economic assistance, $12.4 billion. That's military assistance. But guess where a lot of that goes? Yes, it's going back into the military industrial complex in North America. because there's joint plants, the US, Canada, Raytheon, all of these companies, General Dynamics, Boeing. This is all part of the military industrial complex that just lusts after more wars because they make billions of dollars off of them. So, yes, the money's going back into the military industrial complex, but other monies are being gobbled up by corrupt government officials in Kiev. I call it the black hole of Kiev. Humanitarian assistance, $325.5 million. Development assistance to $442 million. Security and stabilization support. What the hell does that mean? Just about anything else. Approximately $210 million. Total price tag, over $14 billion. Canada has squandered on the war in Ukraine into the black hole of Kiev. So these are the real issues about, should Canada be spending more on its military? Yes, it should be spending more on its military. But should Canada, and I'm going to have a look at your comments here before we go any further, because I really appreciate what you folks are saying. So I've got some more clips to show you, some more information to share with you, but I think this is very important. Yes, Daria, no more money to Ukraine. That's where our military spending is going. That's where it's all going. And if you don't believe me, just have a look. And here's, of course, Justin Trudeau. The last time he was, this is from the 2019 NATO summit when Donald Trump was still president and was at this. Just listen to how Trudeau tap dances around the question of military spending.
I think NATO's become a very big factor over the last 2 or 3 years. You've been involved, I've been involved, and a lot of good things have happened, and it's great to have you here. Thank you very much. And congratulations.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be sitting down with President Trump. The relationship between Canada and the United States is incredibly strong. I don't think it's ever been stronger. Our work together on the USMCA as we move forward towards ratification has been really tremendous. It's been a great process working with between your team and our team, working with the Mexicans as well. We know that we're here for NATO, a 70th anniversary, extremely important. The American strength in ensuring that people are stepping up in terms of their military investments is certainly something we've recognized in Canada. We're increasing our defense investments by 70% over these 10 years because we know that making sure that everyone is there to step up.
Okay, did you just hear him say that? They're increasing defense commitments by 70% over 10 years. That's the line, almost 5 years ago now. Trudeau was claiming in the next 7 years, he was going to increase military spending by 70%. What a complete lie. He's done absolutely nothing. Defense spending is once again stagnant at 1.3, and even in his latest plan will go no higher than 1.76% of the GDP. But he's once again lying through his teeth, as he always does.
And deliver is really important. We have an enhanced forward battle group in Latvia. We're leading the command mission in Baghdad. Canadians are a strong part of this alliance and will continue to be. But this is just a great opportunity for me to sit down with the President and talk about the many issues in which we align and we work together.
So I think NATO's
So Donald Trump has actually mused in the past about the viability of NATO. When he was president, he demanded other countries pay their fair share. I hate that phrase, fair share. But he was saying it's time for the United States to demand the other member states pay a larger portion to remain members of this club. But it's become a club of fools, hasn't it? It's no longer a viable military alliance. It doesn't know what its objectives are, except to foment war with Russia and to interfere in every conflict around the world. It used to have, as I said at the beginning of the broadcast, a clear objective: to contain the Soviet Union, to maintain peace, prosperity, and stability in Western Europe. That's what NATO was all about. And it fulfilled that mandate very well. But after 75 years, I'll say it again, it's time to say so long, farewell, amen. You have way gone past your best before date. And you don't have a clear objective anymore except to interfere in foreign conflicts. And that's all you're doing. And it's time to say enough. So Canada, no, shouldn't be a member of NATO anymore because NATO needs to be dissolved. Canada needs to start building up its defense forces in a credible way, not to become a part of NATO in its foreign wars, not to give tens of billions of dollars away to Ukraine, not to sacrifice the lives of its sons and daughters in stupid foreign wars that mean nothing and that have no relevance to Canadian security. But we need to be a country with a strong, viable defense, yes, but outside of NATO, which is yesterday's organization. It's an organization without any relevance or meaning today. And like I said, I used to write the talking points. I used to try to explain to people how NATO's mission had changed. It wasn't about the Cold War anymore. It wasn't about containing the Soviet Union. It was about, well, intervening in other struggles, intervening anywhere it was needed. Well, that never ends, and there's no point to that. There's no end to that. And it just goes on and on and on. And it costs hundreds of billions of dollars. But you know what? There's some people who want that. And that's called the arms merchants. The merchants of death want that. The military-industrial complex identified by President Dwight Eisenhower in his closing words to the American people in 1961 as president. He said, beware of the military-industrial complex, which will inevitably seek to encroach on democratic freedoms and seek to take more and more power away from the American people and from the American Congress, because it seeks to establish endless wars for its own purpose. And it seeks to become completely indispensable to the American economic scheme. Did you know there was a time in America when defense spending was seen as a negative phenomenon, something that detracted from the economy? That was a long time ago. Ever since 1945, defense spending has been clearly the most dominant factor in the American economy. And that is something that's got to stop. The United States is spending more on its military budget now than it did at the height of the Cold War. Almost $1 trillion a year. I'm not suggesting Canada should spend 10% of that. But yes, we do need a viable military. But no, it cannot be part of NATO anymore. Here's an interesting little get-together between Trudeau and Zelensky. And this shows you exactly what's at play here in NATO.
It seems like we're seeing each other every few weeks now, from Japan at the G7 to when I visited Kyiv a few weeks ago to now here. But it's a really important time for us to be always making sure that we're giving you all the best support we can. It's been an important time to come together to have you at NATO. There's a path forward, and we're continuing to work on getting all the support Ukraine needs during this incredibly pivotal time, as collectively we stand up not just for Ukraine, but against Russia and everything it's trying to destabilize in your country and around the world. As you know, Canada will always be there for Ukraine with everything you need, and we will continue to. It's great to see you.
Again, thanks for your visit to Ukraine, and thanks for real feeling of all of us, all our feeling that really Canadians helped Ukraine and helped from the very beginning of full-scale war. We really count on you, people, and we are the same, and you know that we fight for the same values. And my appreciation for all your support and your government. Thank you very much. And I'm happy that we have conversation today on the field of NATO, and we need your support. I'm sure that we'll have it.
Oh yeah, he's got it. And the problem in Canada right now is that we have a uniparty on supporting Ukraine and supporting NATO and supporting the encroachment and the slow sleepwalk towards a nuclear war with Russia. We have a uniparty support on that, and that's tragic. We need to have more discussion, more debate, because I can tell you that most of the conservative grassroots in this country are opposed to continued military assistance to Ukraine. They want the war to end, and they want the military assistance to end. They want Canada to focus on military needs that are relevant to Canada and to stop interfering in foreign wars, stop getting involved in foreign wars. That's what the conservative grassroots in this country, that's what small c conservatives want, that's what small l libertarians want, a focus on Canadian defense needs, not NATO defense needs, not what the US wants us to do, not what Europe thinks we should do, not what Ukraine thinks we should do. It's time to move beyond that, because NATO has demonstrated it has no raison d'etre anymore, at least one that is viable, comprehensible, understandable, or valid. It has clearly moved beyond the comprehensible or any kind of mission statement that makes sense to anybody watching. It's an organization trying to justify its existence because a lot of people make a lot of money out of NATO. From those who get jobs with the organization, and from all of those arms merchants who make arms to supply to the wars that NATO creates and sustains around the world. Not easy for me to take this position. I wore the uniform proudly, and I still believe strongly in national defense. However, even though I used to write the talking points for NATO and why it was so necessary for NATO to get involved in wars in Bosnia and Afghanistan, I have completely refocused my attention on what is actual, what is real, and what is necessary. And foreign wars are killing us. They're killing the economy, they're killing Canada, they're killing the United States. And it's time to have a new focus. And we need to move away from NATO's outmoded desire to simply justify its existence. It used to have one. It doesn't anymore. So, to sum up, yes, fine, let Canada have a viable national defense. We need it. But no, that viable national defense is not one that should be and remain a part of NATO. NATO as an organization needs to stand down after 75 years. And Trudeau needs to stop being two-faced about running around the world telling people how to vote, how to live democratically, while he shuts down free speech in Canada and hasn't got the decency to support Canada's military, Canada's men and women in uniform, Canada's national defense, the Canadian Armed Forces. He once again is the complete hypocrite, the unalloyed narcissist who thinks it's all about Justin Trudeau, walking on the world stage and telling everyone else how to live, how to vote, how to operate. And he's not prepared to put the money where it should be. And all he wants to do is talk about Ukraine. Let's face it. Ukraine cannot be a member of NATO. Ukraine is not going to win the war with Russia. It's already lost it. NATO cannot continue to insert itself into every foreign war around the world. And Canada cannot continue to function with Justin Trudeau as Prime Minister. It's time for political change. I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thank you for your comments today. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for being here today. We're going to keep getting this message out as much as we can because I believe it's essential. And let's remember Canada first. Let's make Canada great again. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand on Guard and being a part of the KRAYDEN'S Right channel. If you've watched this episode to this point, you've watched it all. And that's really important for a small station like this. We always say subscribe, hit the bell, be a part of the KRAYDEN resistance. Resolve to resist. That's what we're doing. And if you become a subscriber, if you're a supporter of this station or a member through Substack, through YouTube, and now you can be a local as well, that's so important to us because I couldn't do this without you. I made a decision to become an independent journalist about a year ago because I wanted to bring all of my experience in the military, in journalism, to you. I don't promise anything I can't deliver. I don't offer clickbait. I offer truth. The truth is out there. And it's my job to bring that truth to light and to you. Thanks for being a part of the KRAYDEN'S Right resistance, and we'll see you again soon.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need a political change, but we also need to resolve to resist